The sky was an overcast gray that morning, not quite raining, but heavy with the promise of it. In his corner office on the 27th floor, Victor Hall leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on the resume displayed on the screen. "Anita Sharma," he murmured. Something about the applicant's cover letter had caught his eye poised. Eloquent, unflinchingly real, she wasn't the most decorated candidate on paper, but her words had heart. In a world of copy-paste applications, hers read like it had been written at midnight, between worry and hope. Victor, CEO of Halcyon Enterprises, had built his tech firm from a garage startup into a global player. But he never stopped believing in gut feelings, in giving chances to people who reminded him of himself 20 years ago. He picked up his phone, tapped the digits she had listed, and dialed. The ring barely buzzed twice before a child's voice picked up delicate, sweet, and unfiltered. "Hello, Mommy can't talk right now." Victor blinked. "Oh, hi there. Is this Anita Sharma's phone?" he asked gently, slightly thrown off. There was a short pause on the line, the kind of silence that spoke of hesitation, the weight of something unspoken. "Yes, but Mommy is busy. She's crying," the little voice replied, almost in a whisper. Victor sat up straight. The room seemed to go still. He glanced at the resume again, the details blurring slightly. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice softening with each syllable. "I'm Mira," came the reply. "Are you one of Mommy's bosses? She's trying really hard. She says we need the job or we have to go live in the car again." And with that, Victor's breath hitched. Not because it was loud, not because it was said for drama, but because it was to innocent, to unaware the weight it carried. A child who didn't know how harsh those words were, how deeply they could wound an adult heart. For a moment, Victor couldn't speak. He'd grown up in tough conditions, but no child should have to utter those words. "Where's your mom, Mira?" he asked gently. The phone shuffled a bit, and the girl whispered. "In the bedroom. She didn't eat breakfast. She said she messed up her whole life, but I told her she didn't. I told her she's magic." Victor felt something stir in his chest that had long been buried under layers of suits. Board meetings, stock numbers, and IPOs. Magic. That word. That belief. When was the last time anyone had described a struggling parent that way? Certainly not in corporate reports. "Do you think you can go give Mommy the phone, Mira?" he said carefully, aware that this moment wasn't business anymore. It was something far more human. "I'll wait." There was the sound of footsteps, hesitant and light, and then the rustle of fabric, a quiet knock, and the muffled voice of a child whispering, "Mommy, wake up." "It's someone from the job." A groggy, tear-choked voice came on the line a few seconds later. "Hello." It was hoarse, shaky, trying to mask despair under politeness. "This is Anita," she said, breathless. Victor cleared his throat. "Hi, Anita. This is Victor Hall. I'm the CEO of Halcyon Enterprises. I was calling to speak with you directly because your cover letter stood out to me, but I believe I may have reached you at a difficult time." There was a beat of silence, then a ragged inhale. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't know," she answered. I wasn't expecting the call today." Victor replied. "You have a remarkable daughter, Anita. She told me you're magic. That's not something a resume can convey, but that's exactly the kind of person I want in my company." On the other side of the call, Anita's hand flew to her mouth. For months, she'd been holding together a life that had unraveled since her husband left, since the pandemic cost her the jobs, since eviction notices started arriving like junk mail. The call wasn't supposed to come today. She had been curled up on a mattress, crying into a pillow so her daughter wouldn't hear. But children hear everything, feel everything, and carry it with them even when they smile. Victor continued, "Let's do this. I want to meet you. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., video call. No formality, just a conversation." Anita nodded, though the CEO couldn't see. "Yes," she said quietly, then added, Thank you so much." And just before hanging up, Victor paused. "Tell Mira," he said, "that her magic worked." The line went dead, but in a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a rough part of the city, a woman sat holding her phone, trembling, as her daughter hugged her waist. And for the first time in months, Anita Sharma smiled through her tears. The next morning, sunlight slipped lazily through the dusty blinds of Anita Sharma's apartment. It painted narrow golden lines across the faded floor tiles and landed on the small kitchen table, where Mira was humming quietly, coloring on scrap paper. Anita stood frozen in front of the cracked mirror in the cramped hallway. She had one good shirt left white with light blue lining around the collar. It used to be part of her work uniform when she had a reception job at a mid-tier hotel. The collar was slightly worn, but it was clean and pressed. Her hands trembled as she adjusted it. She hadn't looked in a mirror with confidence in months. Not since everything spiraled: the foreclosure, the debts, the loneliness. But today felt like a thread pulling her out of that darkness. That voice on the phone, Victor's voice, it had carried something rare. Respect. In the living room, her aging laptop sat on a wobbly stool, charging from the only outlet that still worked. She had cleaned the camera lens with the edge of her sleeve, checked her notes twice, and written down reminders in her daughter's glittery pink notebook. But none of it compared to the preparation happening inside her heart. Anita wasn't just hoping for a job anymore. She was hoping for a lifeline. And more than that, she wanted to show Mira that miracles don't just belong in bedtime stories. They belong in effort, in courage. In the mornings you decide to get up one more time than you fall. At exactly 9:58 a.m., her screen flickered and the meeting invitation popped up. She clicked it with shaking fingers. The camera loaded slowly, and then suddenly, there he was. Victor Hall, clean-shaven, suit crisp, yet something in his eyes was softer than what you'd expect from a man whose net worth made headlines. He smiled, not the kind of smile CEOs wear in press releases, but one that said, "I remember everything your daughter said yesterday." "Good morning, Anita," he began, his tone calm, respectful. "Thank you for agreeing to this on such short notice." Anita nodded, trying to steady her voice. "Thank you for giving me the chance, Mr. Hall. I wasn't prepared yesterday." "I'm so sorry for what you heard." But Victor gently raised a hand. "Don't apologize. What I heard yesterday was honesty, and I respect that more than perfection." For the next 30 minutes, they didn't talk like interviewer and applicant. They talked like human beings. Anita spoke of her journey, how she immigrated with her husband 5 years ago, how she had worked 2 jobs to help pay for his business degree, how things fell apart when he left and never looked back. She had no family here, only her daughter, and a will to survive that she sharpened every day like a blade. She told Victor about how she taught herself spreadsheet software during Mira's nap times, how she practiced customer support scripts at night, how she even applied for janitorial roles when the savings dried up. Victor truly listened, not just to her qualifications, but to her resilience. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, but also the quiet storm behind them. This was a woman who didn't crumble when life cracked her open. She endured, she adapted, and that, in his view, was the rarest form of professionalism there was. "I have to admit something," Victor finally said, leaning back in his chair. "I get hundreds of resumes. Sometimes I don't even get to read half of them myself. But yours, something about it made me pause. Maybe because you didn't write like someone who was selling herself. You wrote like someone who had nothing left to prove but everything to give." Anita blinked, her throat tightening. No one had spoken to her like that in years. She had grown used to being ignored, dismissed, even pitied, but never valued. And now, sitting in front of this screen, with her daughter's laughter echoing faintly in the background, she felt something shift inside. Hope wasn't just a word anymore. It had shape, a face. A timestamp: 10:34 a.m. Victor paused before adding, "I want to offer you a contract. It's a remote role, entry level, but with full benefits. We'll start there. I believe in growing talent, not just buying it." Anita gasped softly, one hand instinctively covering her mouth. "Are you serious?" Victor smiled, not with pride, but with warmth. "Absolutely, and one more thing, if it's okay with you. I'd like to send a small care package to Mira. After all, it was her magic that got this meeting in the first place." The call ended with tears, laughter, and a stunned silence in Anita's apartment. She sat for a while, staring at the blank screen where Victor's face had just been, unable to fully process what had just happened. Mira skipped in, dragging her coloring sheet. "Did you get the job, Mommy?" Anita lifted her daughter into her lap and nodded, eyes brimming. "Yes, sweetheart. You got me the job that evening with one half-working lamp and a tiny bag of microwave popcorn." They celebrated, not with extravagance, but with joy, pure, unfiltered joy. Anita's heart was still heavy with debts and uncertainty, but now it floated just a little higher because now someone believed in her, and more importantly, Mira saw her mother win, not in some big TV-style drama, but in real life, through honesty, effort, and love. The next few days passed like a dream, slowly becoming real. Anita's mornings were no longer haunted by job rejection emails or missed calls from creditors. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table with a mug of instant coffee, her laptop open, and a genuine sense of purpose humming inside her chest. Her onboarding training had begun, and while the role itself was entry-level, Victor had kept his promise, assigning her a mentor, providing clear instruction, and more importantly, treating her with a kind of respect she'd forgotten existed in the corporate world. Each evening, she would update Mira about the day's work in small stories, how the software worked, who she talked to, how she accidentally called her boss twice before remembering his name was Darren, and he laughed about it. But on Thursday afternoon, something unexpected happened. Anita was on her third Zoom module, headphones in, eyes straining slightly against the screen's glow, when a knock came at the door. Not a loud, urgent knock, but a soft, cautious one. Mira, who had been sketching dragons in pink crayon nearby, looked up with wide eyes. "Mommy, someone's here," she whispered, always instinctively cautious. Anita got up slowly, her mind racing. She wasn't expecting a visitor. No packages, no deliveries, nothing. When she opened the door, a delivery driver stood there, with a large brown box resting on his trolley. "Delivery for Mira Sharma?" he asked, glancing at the shipping label. Anita blinked. "Mira?" she repeated, stunned. "Are you sure?" The man nodded and handed her a small electronic pad to sign. The box was bigger than a microwave, neatly taped and marked fragile in red. She thanked him, shut the door, and knelt down beside it, Mira hovering with curious excitement in her eyes. "Open it, Mommy," the girl squealed. Anita found a pair of scissors, cut through the tape, and folded back the flaps. Inside, wrapped in soft tissue and biodegradable packing paper, was a plush purple unicorn with silver hooves, eyes that sparkled, and a tag that read, "To Mira, keep believing in magic, from someone who heard your heart." Beneath the toy was a smaller box containing a stack of children's books, each one gently used, but lovingly packed stories about brave girls, big dreams, and single moms who moved mountains. There was also a note, handwritten on ivory cardstock. "Mira, your words reminded me that magic is real. You made your mother shine before the world saw her, so here's a little magic for you, too. With love, Victor Hall." Anita couldn't breathe for a second. She touched the edge of the card like it was something holy. Mira, meanwhile, let out a delighted gasp as she hugged the unicorn to her chest, spinning around the living room with joy. "He sent this for me?" she asked in disbelief. Anita nodded, voice thick. "Yes, baby, he did. Because you helped me more than anyone ever has." That night, Anita sat awake on the couch long after Mira had fallen asleep with the unicorn tucked in beside her. She stared at the ceiling, tears gently tracing the sides of her face, not from sadness, but from something deeper, a kind of emotional release she hadn't allowed herself in years. She wasn't just thankful. She was transformed. In Victor's gesture, she saw more than charity. She saw recognition. He hadn't done it out of pity. He'd done it with respect, with a listening heart. That made all the difference. Meanwhile, across the city, Victor sat alone in his penthouse apartment, watching the city lights flicker through the window. The box delivery confirmation had just arrived on his phone. He let out a slow breath, recalling the first time he had felt completely unseen. He was 11 when his father was laid off from the factory, and his mother cried in the kitchen, whispering that they might have to sell the car. No one sent them unicorns. No one called to offer a job. But they made it through, and that memory, that old ache, had never left him. Perhaps that's why Mira's voice had cut so deeply into his chest. It reminded him of a child trying to carry the weight of a world far too heavy. The next morning, Anita sent him an email, not long, just a few lines. She attached a photo of Mira asleep with the unicorn, and the caption read, "From one heart to another, thank you for reminding us that people still care." Victor didn't reply right away. He just stared at the image, his throat tight. In that moment, he knew this wasn't going to be a one-time act of kindness. Something inside him had shifted. He didn't just want to help. He wanted to change the way his company saw people, not as resumes, but as stories, as lives waiting for someone to listen. It was a Monday that began like any other inside Halcyon Enterprises' polished hallways echoed, with the sound of designer shoes. Elevator doors pinged in precise harmony. and the faint hum of espresso machines underscored the chatter of analysts, assistants, and engineers. Victor Hall, CEO, arrived precisely at 8:47 a.m., his security badge flashing as he moved through the glass entrance. But this time, he carried something different under his arm, not a quarterly report or strategy dossier, but a printed photo of Meera Sharma sleeping soundly with the unicorn he had sent, her hand curled protectively round its sparkly hoof, her mouth parted in peaceful rest. He had printed it that morning deliberately, carefully, and now it was inside a leather folder alongside his notes. For the company's quarterly leadership meeting, today wasn't about performance metrics alone. Today, he was going to say something that had been building in his chest for years. As the boardroom filled, executives nodded to each other with brief smiles, phones placed face down out of courtesy, rather than commitment. The head of finance adjusted his tie. The VP of marketing scrolled quickly through her presentation slides. Victor sat quietly at the end of the long mahogany table, glancing briefly out the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the sprawl of the city below. This company had begun in a basement and grown into a skyline, but somewhere along the way, something sacred had been buried beneath KPIs and spreadsheets: humanity. The thing that Meera's voice had reawakened. When the meeting began, numbers were presented: profits up by 6.3%, client acquisition stable, R&D projects under budget. Polite nods followed each report. Then it was Victor's turn. He stood up, slowly, didn't walk to the screen, didn't cue any slides. Instead, he placed the leather folder on the table and opened it. "I'm not going to show you graphs today," he said calmly. "We'll get to those. But first, I want to tell you a story." There was a shift in the room, small, but unmistakable. Eyes lifted, fingers paused over touch screens. Victor continued, "Last week, I called a job applicant, not through HR. I read her resume myself. It was raw, honest, not polished, but it moved me. Her name was Anita Sharma." He let the name hang in the air for a moment, but she didn't answer the call. Her daughter did. Several executives exchanged quick glances. Surprised, Victor opened the folder and held up the photo of Meera. "This is Meera. She's 5. When she picked up the phone, she told me her mommy was crying and couldn't come to the phone. She also told me her mommy was magic." A quiet hush swept the room. No one typed. No one looked away. "That one phone call changed the way I see everything we do here." He set the photo down gently. Anita didn't beg. She didn't pitch herself. She just spoke the truth about losing everything, about trying to stay strong for her daughter, about teaching herself skills late at night with a child sleeping on her lap. His voice lowered, not from weakness, but from conviction. "And now she works for us, entry-level, remote. She's one of 100 stories no one ever sees because we built a system that favors polish over potential, and I want that to change." There was a silence in the room that felt like a held breath. Victor leaned forward. "We talk about innovation, we talk about talent, but we overlook people like Anita because they didn't go to Stanford or because they don't have 5 years in a SaaS role. We screen for technical fluency and forget emotional intelligence. We build gates instead of bridges, and I believe that's no longer acceptable." The VP of HR, a woman named Deborah, who had been with the company since its early days, looked up with misty eyes. "Victor, are you saying we should rethink our hiring model?" He nodded. "Not just rethink it, reinvent it. Let's create an alternative hiring pipeline, one based not only on skills, but on grit, compassion, adaptability. Let's partner with shelters, community centers, single-parent advocacy groups. Let's look for people who fought through storms instead of waiting for the skies to clear." The CFO raised a brow, intrigued. "Do you think that's scalable?" Victor smiled faintly. "It already is. We've just never scaled our hearts." That afternoon, the meeting room became a crucible of ideas, emotions, and unexpected alignment. One by one, people around the table began sharing stories of their own past struggles, of people they once passed over, of regrets buried beneath corporate structure. By the end of the meeting, Victor didn't have a memo. He had a movement, and it began with one little girl's whisper across a phone line. Meanwhile, Anita sat at her laptop, finishing her first task submission and internal client report. She double-checked everything, reading each line aloud quietly while Meera colored beside her, still humming that little made-up song about magic and unicorns. She had no idea that her story was now sitting at the core of a Fortune 500 company's new vision, that her pain had become purpose. that her little girl's voice had echoed all the way into the boardroom of a high-rise. Later that week, Victor sent her another message, brief and personal. "You've inspired more than you know. Thank you, Anita. Tell Mira the magic's working." She replied with just 2 words, "We believe." The weeks had passed since the call that changed everything. Anita Sharma had since submitted 3 internal reports, received her first paycheck, and even been invited to a virtual coffee chat with her project manager and apartment team. She still carried the weight of unpaid bills and looming apartment repairs. But now her back stood straighter. Her voice didn't tremble in meetings. She wore confidence the way a mother wears armor, not for show, but for survival. Yet neither she nor Mira knew that their story, once confined to a dusty hallway and a failing phone line, was quietly rippling outward like a stone cast into a still lake. It began when Victor shared the photo of Mira with his internal staff. Newsletter. The story had no names, just the outline of what happened, the phone call, the little girl's honesty, and the decision to offer her mother a job. At first, it was just a feel-good footnote in the digital document meant to boost morale. But one employee forwarded it to her sister, who worked at a local nonprofit. That sister shared it with her LinkedIn network, and that's when something unexpected happened. The post exploded. Within 24 hours, over 50,000 reactions flooded in. Comments ranged from stunned admiration to shared stories of single parents who had battled through impossible odds. "I was that little girl once," one user wrote. "My mom answered phones while pretending we still had a home." Another said, "This story broke me. I work in HR. We can and should do better." People began tagging companies, CEOs, influencers. Then journalists reached out, not for gossip, but to ask for the full story. They wanted to know the woman behind the courage, the little girl behind the whisper. Victor was cautious at first. He had promised Anita privacy, and that mattered more to him than viral fame. So he called her directly. When Anita saw Victor Hall flash on her screen again, her heart leapt, not with fear, but with that odd cocktail of gratitude and disbelief that had defined her days lately. She answered quickly, and his voice came through warm and steady. "Anita," he began, "I need to ask your permission. Something's happening, and I want to make sure you and Mira are comfortable before I say yes to any of it." She listened as he explained how the story was spreading, how people had resonated not with the company, but with the little girl's words, with the idea that kindness didn't need to be corporate, that humanity could live in a hiring process. Anita sat still for a long moment before replying. "Do they want to see our faces?" she asked gently. Victor hesitated. "Some do, but they'll respect anonymity. You don't have to share anything you don't want to." Anita looked across the room, where Mira was now making a paper crown for her unicorn with unmatched stickers and glue. A strange calm came over her. If this story can help someone else, another mother, another child, then let them hear it. They don't need our photos. They just need our truth. Victor nodded, feeling both pride and responsibility deepen in his chest. "Thank you," he said simply. "We'll protect your names, but the world's going to hear what Mira said." That day, and they did, major business journals published a feature titled "The Interview That Changed a CEO and a Company." Podcasts invited Victor to speak, not about leadership or innovation, but about empathy and second chances. One article in particular went viral, "The Girl Who Called Her Mother Magic," and made the world listen. It recounted the story as a parable for modern work culture, a challenge to every hiring gatekeeper who ever dismissed a candidate for not checking the right boxes. Suddenly, your magic became a hashtag. Artists began illustrating the moment, a child on the phone, a mother in the background, a unicorn at her side. One nonprofit launched a campaign in partnership with Halcyon Enterprises to create mentorship programs for parents re-entering the workforce. Anonymous donors reached out offering to fund daycare, training, even housing. Victor forwarded only the offers he believed were respectful and aligned with Anita's pride, and every time he checked in, Anita remained grounded, humble, and focused. She didn't want handouts. She wanted opportunity, and Mira, she just wanted more glue sticks. But one message stood out from the rest. It was a handwritten letter sent to the company's physical headquarters, addressed in big, uncertain letters, to the man who called the magic girl. Inside was a note from a 10-year-old boy in foster care. He wrote, "I don't have a mom, but I read your story in class. I think Mira is brave. I think you are too. When I get big, I want to help people the same way." Tucked in with the letter was a single crayon drawing of three stick figures, a girl, her mom, and a man in a suit holding a phone. Victor stared at that drawing for a long time. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a symbol, a call to arms, a reminder that in a world obsessed with resumes and algorithms, sometimes the voice of a child can awaken something greater than any boardroom metric. As the weeks went on, Anita continued to thrive in her role. Her work ethic didn't just meet expectations, it quietly rewrote them. She was soon invited to collaborate on a new internal initiative aimed at recruiting candidates from unconventional backgrounds, and when her probation period ended, Victor didn't just approve her for full-time. He added a personal note to her offer letter. "You were never temporary. Welcome home." And on a chilly Friday morning, as Mira danced across their small apartment with her crown on crooked and the unicorn tucked beneath her arm, Anita looked out the window and whispered to herself, "They heard you, Mira. The whole world heard you." Winter settled softly over the city, brushing rooftops with frost and painting breath clouds in the early morning chill. Anita pulled the collar of her jacket up against the wind. As she walked briskly down the sidewalk, Mira's hand tucked tightly into hers. The invitation had arrived 2 weeks earlier, an elegant envelope embossed with Halcyon Enterprises logo, and a handwritten note from Victor Hall himself. "We're launching something new, a program built from your courage and your daughter's voice. I'd be honored if you and Mira would attend the announcement event. Speak if you wish, but only if you're comfortable." Anita had stared at the note for over an hour, reading the words again and again as her stomach flipped between disbelief and pride. She had shown Mira, who had simply grinned and asked, "Will there be cookies?" Now they were here, walking through the glass doors of a downtown event hall, polished floors, warm lights, crisp signage, and tables set up with name cards and tall pitchers of water. Anita was dressed in a navy blue blouse she'd found at a thrift shop, tailored to fit her by a neighbor who insisted she look presidential. Mira wore a simple white dress with a glittery headband and, of course, clutched her unicorn tightly under one arm. As they stepped inside, a woman approached them with a kind smile and an earpiece. "You must be Anita," she said, gently touching her clipboard, "and this must be Mira. We've set up a seat in the front row for you. Don't worry. You're not on the formal speakers list unless you decide last minute." Anita smiled, her nerves tingling in her chest, but nodded gratefully. Inside the main hall, the seats quickly filled with an audience that was anything but ordinary. CEOs, nonprofit leaders, social workers, educators, hiring managers, and interns from all walks of life had gathered for one reason: to witness the launch of Halcyon's new initiative, the Human First program. It wasn't just a corporate campaign. It was a revolution in how companies identified talent, a framework designed to prioritize potential, resilience, and emotional intelligence just as much as experience and credentials. The pilot program would launch in 3 cities with plans to expand across states and sectors. It would offer mentorship, training, placement, and most importantly, respect. Victor Hall stood on stage, wearing a gray suit and no tie, his sleeves slightly rolled. Behind him, a screen cycled through images, an abstract visual of a phone call, an animation of a unicorn, silhouettes of parents balancing children and career dreams. The audience fell silent as he stepped up to the podium. "We live in a time," he began, "where everything is filtered, optimized, and structured to reward polish. But what if I told you the most profound moment I've experienced as a CEO came from a trembling voice on a broken phone line?" He paused, letting the stillness settle. A little girl answered the phone. Her name was Mira. "She told me her mother was crying. She told me her mother was magic." And that one sentence cracked something open inside me. The audience leaned, and some misty-eyed already. Victor continued, "That call didn't just change how I saw one job application. It changed how I see talent, struggle, strength. It made me realize that our hiring systems have become too narrow, too blind to stories, too deaf to quiet brilliance." The screen behind him shifted to show a quote. "You're magic, Mommy." Gasps and smiles flickered across the room. Those words weren't meant to start a movement, he said, but they did. Then he looked directly toward the front row, meeting Anita's eyes. "Anita Sharma is here with us today, and so is Mira. They didn't ask for this attention, they earned it, because their truth showed us the cracks in our walls, and through those cracks, we saw the light." The applause was thunderous, heartfelt, rising like a wave and sweeping across the room. Anita felt her cheeks flush, her throat tighten. She looked down at Mira, who beamed up at her proudly and whispered, "He said your name, Mommy." Anita turned, unsure if she could find her voice, but something within her stirred. Maybe it was the warmth of the room, the collective energy, or the quiet power of her child's presence. Maybe it was time. She rose slowly and walked toward the stage. The crowd fell into a hush as Victor stepped back and Anita took the microphone. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The lights were bright, the silence thick, but then she thought of every night she cried quietly into her pillow. Every job she'd been rejected from, every time Mira had whispered hope into her exhausted heart. She inhaled. "I never thought I'd stand here," she began, her voice trembling but strong. "A year ago, I couldn't even afford to fix our heater. I didn't know if I'd ever work again. I didn't know if I was still worth hiring. But then my daughter answered a phone call that I thought was lost. And instead of shame, she spoke magic. She looked over at Mira, who gave her an enthusiastic thumbs up. The crowd chuckled warmly. Anita smiled. What happened after that changed everything for me. But more importantly, it showed me that the world is still listening if you speak from the heart. I didn't come here to be a success story. I came here to say thank you. To every single person who sees more than a resume. To everyone who chooses empathy. The applause that followed was softer this time. Not loud, but longer, like an embrace stretching across the walls. Anita returned to her seat as Mira clapped with exaggerated gusto, then leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. Later that night, as they walked home beneath a sky full of stars, Mira looked up and said, "You were really brave up there." "Mommy," Anita smiled, brushing a hand over her daughter's cheek. "I just told the truth, sweetheart." Mira thought for a moment. "Is that what magic is?" Anita nodded. "Yes, that's exactly what magic is."